Good afternoon. My name is Kim Hewitt, and I'm here at the Falls at Cordingley Dam with Manny Brown. Together, we're participating in the Newton Talks Oral History Project that's being conducted with the Newton Free Library, Historic Newton, and the Newton Senior Center. So, Manny, can you tell us what your relationship is with Newton?
Before I moved to Newton, I lived in South Brookline.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, the house I owned had 9 stairs to get into the house, and the laundry and the dryer were in the basement. And my wife had 2 knee replacements, so she couldn't do that walking.
Right.
So we moved to the towers at Chestnut Hill, and where there were elevators and stairs only used in case of emergency.
Okay. And how long have you lived in Newton again?
I moved there in 1983, and when my wife passed in 2008, I stayed there until 2011, and I couldn't handle I got sick and I couldn't handle it anymore, so I came here.
Oh, okay. So what were you doing before you entered the service?
I was, I went to the government had a drafting school to become a draftsman in Maine, and I didn't like it, and I left, and I couldn't get a job because I was 1B. I was rejected on account of my eyesight. So I went to the draft board and I asked when I was going to be called. And they said, "You're going to be called in January." I said, "Well, I don't have any money." And my father lost his job. His company went bankrupt. Just, I want to go in the Army. They said, "Well, would you like to go in October?" I said, "The quicker the better." So I went in October.
Okay.
And so that was 1942.
So how did you adapt to military life? Was that hard? What was the physical regimen?
No, it's just a job. I enjoyed it because I went to summer camp as a kid. So I knew what it was to be away from home.
Okay. How did you stay in touch with family and friends while you were in the Army?
Mostly mail.
Yeah. Did you correspond often?
No.
No. Okay. So I want to talk more about where exactly you served, and do you remember arriving?
Abilene, Texas. Camp Barkeley was the name of the camp.
Okay.
And I joined the 90th Infantry Division, and I was in the infantry from day one until I got discharged.
Okay. Were you anywhere else?
Well, we went on maneuvers in Louisiana,
Mm-hmm.
and then in California in the Mojave Desert, then back to Fort Dix in New Jersey, and then Europe.
Where in Europe were you stationed?
Well, we were getting ready. We didn't know it, but we were getting ready for D-Day.
Ah.
We arrived on Easter Sunday in March, I believe, and we trained, and then we ended up in Cardiff, Wales. And then before D-Day, for the week before, they put us in a warehouse with no beds. And we slept on the floor.
Wow.
And every morning, we would go to the docks, no boats. The 5th morning, the boat was there. And we didn't know, we thought we were going to Italy. But if I knew geography, I was always with the company commander. They took us to a gazebo surrounded by 8 armed soldiers. And there was a battalion. There were a captain and the company headquarters man and 4 other company commanders. They showed us a map with no names. And they showed us a peninsula. We didn't know what it was. It was Cherbourg. No names. Just, you saw the ocean and a piece of land sticking into the ocean. And that was where we landed on D-Day.
When did you realize you weren't going to Italy?
We never knew. We were going up and down the English Channel for 4 days. We didn't know. We didn't know. All we do was line up. There were 5,000 soldiers on this boat, and spent most of the time standing in line waiting to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Can you tell me a bit of, can you tell me a few of your most memorable experiences while you were away?
One of the saddest experiences was in Cardiff, Wales. It was Passover, and a lieutenant asked all the Jewish fellows if they wanted to go to the synagogue, which there were 8 of us. And he told us, after the services, they're going to invite you for dinner. Turn them down, because there's not enough food for themselves. And after services, an old man came over to me, and he invited me for dinner. And I told him I had a previous engagement, and he knew well I was lying. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anybody in Cardiff, Wales. Tears came to his eyes. I said, I'm sorry, I have a previous engagement. And that was one of the saddest things.
Yeah. Do you recall any particularly humorous events or anything funny that kind of happened in your time?
There's nothing funny in war.
Do you remember the day your service ended? Do you remember the day your service ended?
When I got discharged from the service in October of 1945.
Mm-hmm. So was that like for you to come home?
No, I spent 5 days in Normandy in the field hospital where I was operated on. I spent 5 months in England, and a strange thing happened. I was on a stretcher waiting to be placed in a ward, and a medical doctor came over and looked at my dog tags. Number 3 was my first number, which means you're from New England. And he said to me, where are you from? I says, Boston. He says, what street? And I told him 42 Phillips Street in Boston. He said, he lived at 40, but I never knew him. He was a medical doctor. Never saw him after that.
Wow.
And I had a cousin that was a colonel who was stationed in England, and he came to the hospital to visit me in England. And after he left, they treated me like I was a general. The nurses and the doctors. Mm-hmm. And that was it.
Okay. So what was it like to return to civilian life?
Very easy. I got a job in a office supply company, and I worked there for 3 years. And I was told there was an office supply company for sale. The owner had passed, and his widow did not want the business, and it was up for bid. And I bid, and their attorney called me and said, you can have the business at what you bid. He says, you were not the high bidder, you were the low bidder. I said, well, why are you giving it to me? He said, I think you're going to make a success of the business, which fortunately I did.
So, how did your services and your experience affect your life and your outlook on war and military in general?
Well, you ended up with a couple of very close friends, and my wife and I and our son was then 10 years old. We went to Washington to visit his sister, and we used to get letters from the old 90th Division company, and our former cook was a chef at the Willard Hotel. We were in downtown Washington, and I said to my wife, I'm going to go visit, see if I can find Sergeant Pass, our old cook. So my wife and her sister went shopping, which women usually do, and my son and I went to the Willard Hotel, and we asked for Donald Pass. Out comes Donald Pass with the big white hat, and he said, Brownie, he says, they told me you got killed. I said, luckily, here I am. And we had a 10-minute conversation. He had to go back to work, and that was it. And then I had a business on Boylston Street, Copley Square, and a former sergeant in my company came in. He was Sergeant Barker. He was from New Mexico. I said, what are you doing in Boston? He said, well, I'm an agricultural commissioner in New Mexico, and we're having a convention in Boston. I said, how about coming to my house for dinner tonight? He says, no, I can't. We have meetings to go to. Never saw him again. It was the only two that I met that it was that we were close with in the company. An infantry company consists of 187 men, so you don't get to know all of them. Some you never see from one day to the other.
But you kept a few close friends, you said?
Pardon me?
You kept a few close friends through
Well,
your life after the service?
Not really, because you never see them again. I kept in touch with the closest one was Angelo Colombo, who lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and I used to call him occasionally.
So is there anything else you want to share with us about your experience in the service?
A lieutenant was giving us a lecture in Texas about sunstroke. Make sure you keep your helmet on at all times. Well, I was busy talking to the fellow sitting next to me on the side of the hill, and he said, Brown, how do you get sunstroke? And I said, from the sun. And he had it in for me. Now we're in Louisiana on maneuvers, and we got a new weapon called a bazooka. It was like a stovepipe, an instrument that two men, one fired and one put the shell in. It was an anti-tank weapon. Now, you stayed in the middle of the company, and when they yelled tanks on the left, you ran to the left. They yelled tanks to the right, you ran to the right. So, in Louisiana, very easily you get heated up. At the end of the day, I ended up lying on the ground, shivering. And this lieutenant, who I didn't get along with, said, throw a blanket on him. Another lieutenant came by and said, take him to the medics. I had pneumonia.
So can you tell me about the medals you have here?
Well, the one on the left is the Bronze Star. The one on the right is the Purple Heart. The Combat Infantry Badge with the reef means you were in actual combat.
Okay.
They have it, if you weren't in combat and you were in that kind of a division, you didn't get the wreath.
Okay.
And the Good Conduct Medal, because I behaved. And there's the Europe-Africa Medal, but I was never in Africa except on a tour with my wife. The World War II Victory Medal. The French Medal is for being a participant from D-Day.
Okay.
Purple Heart is when you get wounded.
Oh.
And this was a marksman. Well, this was for a sharpshooter. This is for marksman. And then the stripes are, I was a sergeant. And this was a lapel saying you served in World War II.
How did you get your Purple Heart?
Pardon me?
How did you get your Purple Heart?
When you get wounded, you get a Purple Heart. It's not a nice gift.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
My pleasure.
Appreciated it. We're really happy to include you in the Newton Talks oral history. And that's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing
Good
everything.
job, Manny.
Sorry, old girl.